Dr. Hui, what specific hard evidence proves that the Wuhan lab did experiments that created the virus? Do we have specific hard evidence?
No, one of our biggest challenges is we don't know what they've done inside there. We know what they were doing in the past. We know what they did in the fall of 2019, all consistent with the things you would do if there had been a laboratory accident there. You know, filing a patent, the first patent out of 600 patents for a device to prevent a coronavirus infection in an infected worker. One of the inventors on that patent is a PLA military doctor scientist. The head of the laboratory was dismissed, and a PLA the soldier was put in charge of the laboratory December 2019. So we don't have access inside the laboratory. We probably will never have it. But the genome inside the virus comports to the diffuse grant in such a way that it's inconsistent. I mean, in a court of law, you find someone criminally for 95% or greater probabilities, and this is 1 in a billion, which is greater than that this is a synthetic virus.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth. So I mean, a lot of these are assumptions that you're making, not hard evidence.
The hard evidence is the incidence of the features of SARS COVID-19 can individually be looked at in nature. They can be identified with the frequency in nature, and then you can say, what is the chance that each of these were combined in one virus at the same time? This is what virologists do all the time in looking for origins. And when you do that, you conclude that it has a 1 in a billion chance of coming from nature, and it meets all 7 criteria of the diffuse grant.
Okay, thank you. Ranking Member Paul, you're recognized for questions.
Dr. Gary indicated that the intelligence community was somewhat unified, or a lot of them believe this came from animals, and that's just not true. The ones that have been vocal about this and talked a lot about it have been the DOE, which has more scientists than any other agency in Washington, probably other than NIH. They've concluded that it did come from the lab. FBI concluded it came from the lab, and we have a whistleblower from the CIA that says the scientists that were convened to study this voted 6-1 to say it came from the lab, and then they were overruled by superiors for political reasons. So there's a lot of evidence that people within the intel agencies actually do believe that there is evidence that it came from the lab. In addition to people getting sick, there's also about a week in October where they do imagery of who's using a cell phone, and nobody's using a cell phone in the lab for about a week. So the lab's completely empty for about a week, and some people think that was during a cleanup period. But if you're sitting at home and you're sort of an independent, you hear scientists over here saying gain of function is the best thing since sliced bread, and over here you're saying, well, we really haven't developed any meaningful vaccines or technology from this, you're like, who do I believe? And who you believe does go to character, and so we have to look at some of the statements. Like I say, I've never seen anything like this between public and private statements. So Christian Anderson, early on in this, sends an email to Fauci, and his Fauci says, Bob Gary, and a couple of the other virologists, we think it's inconsistent. This virus, this genetic sequence of COVID is inconsistent with the expectations of evolutionary theory. So they believed it didn't come from nature. They had looked at this. These are smart people that when they were not looking at it, when they were trying to look at it through an objective lens, concluded one thing until they came to another conclusion that it might hurt the business of science and the arrangements they had going on with China, and concluded opposite. But with Christian Anderson, it's stark because he says, oh, Bob and all these, we all believe it's inconsistent with the expectations of evolutionary theory. A week later, Christian Anderson is saying, what I like to use when I talk to the public is, I like to tell them it's consistent with the expectations of evolutionary theory. So he goes from inconsistent to consistent, complete opposite approach within days, maybe even simultaneously as these papers are being written. So really the hypocrisy of those involved and those who are saying not a laboratory construct, if you want to know who to believe, look at their private statements versus their public statements. So we have gain of function is the best thing since sliced bread, or gain of function is a real problem. Now, Senator Romney's like, well, why does it matter if there's a chance we should do something? I think he's right. If you believe there's a 1% chance we should do something. But if you think there's a 1% chance, or you want to sort of glad hand people at the end and say, well, we should do something, their argument for the people who think it's not likely to happen is going to be, oh, the administration's already fixed this. It's already done, and all we need is a few little regulatory things. We don't need legislation. We don't need independent oversight. We don't need people looking at this who aren't on the receiving end of the money. This is the whole problem of NIH. The people regulating themselves aren't getting the money. So the administration has put in place some regulations to try to, help with the buying of select agents. And Dr. Quay, if you could explain to us what a few MIT scientists did recently and how well the administrative regulations are working without actual congressional legislation.
Sure. So 3 scientists at MIT said they were going to be a red team, and they contacted the FBI because what they were going to do was about to be potentially illegal. And they put together ricin and the 1918 influenza. Those 2 are select agents, and they're highly lethal. And they broke the genes up in a particular way. They added some benign genes, and then they put out test orders roughly following the White House guidelines, test orders to see if laboratories would send them the pieces they needed to build these viruses or ricin, or they would stop them. And in fact, in 94% of the time, they sent the pieces right to them. They purposely didn't make the active strain of the RNA. They made the inactive strain to show that they could do it. But they proved they could make ricin. They proved they could make the 1918 influenza under the guidance that had just come out of the White House in a way that
this gets at where we go forward. Our next hearing, or one of our next hearings, is going to be, what do we do for gain of function reform? What kind of committee do we set up to look at this? And if the answer is from the other side, oh, it's already done, the White House did it, this is showing you what the White House did, even if it was well-intentioned, didn't work. These scientists got the material off the internet to create the Spanish flu that killed 50, 100 million people. So this is not something we should scoff at and say, oh, it's not a laboratory construct, we don't do anything here, let the administration do this. And I would say this if it were a Republican administration. I don't care which party it's in. I agree with scientists like Kevin Esfeld who equate this with nuclear weapons. This is incredibly important and needs congressional oversight on the select agents, but also on the gain of function.